You won't believe what my husband made me do. 3 men one night? It was supposed to be a joke, but it almost ruined everything. It was a Friday night. One of those nights when you just want to relax. Leave the stress of the week behind and just be with the one you love. My husband and I were relaxing at home, drinking wine and talking about random things. It felt like those quiet nights when you don't expect anything important to happen. But then he brought up something that completely surprised me. He casually asked me if I had ever thought about being with other men. At first I thought he was joking, so I laughed. But then he kept talking. Not only did he mean just any men, but he was talking specifically about black men, 3 of them. My heart started beating fast, but not in a good way. I couldn't process what he was suggesting to me. Who just says something like that? I looked at him hoping for some sign that he was joking, but his expression remained the same, totally serious. I felt uncomfortable, to say the least. I thought maybe it was a weird fantasy that he wanted to share, and we would soon drop the subject. But no, he kept bringing it up in conversation. At first, it was small comments, playful jokes about what might be. Then, he started making more direct suggestions. Said it could make our relationship more exciting, that it would be something pointed that could add a little spice to our life together. I didn't even know how to react. What was I supposed to say? Was this some kind of test? As the days went by, the topic kept coming up in our conversations. At first, I would quickly dismiss it, changing the subject or making excuses, but my husband kept insisting. He even started talking about specific men, friends of his. He would tell me that they were all good guys and that nothing would happen unless I wanted it to, and that it would just be for fun. My stomach twisted every time he mentioned it, but I didn't know how to tell him how much it bothered me. Part of me didn't want to start a fight, but another part felt a growing resentment. One night, he went even further. He suggested we meet these 3 men. He presented it as if it was no big deal, just a casual meeting with some of his friends. I hesitated, not knowing if it was another one of his attempts to pressure me into doing something I wasn't comfortable with. But to keep the peace and not ruin our marriage over what I hoped was just a bad idea, I agreed to go. That night, we met his friends at a local bar. The whole time I felt nervous, like I was walking into a trap. His friends seemed polite enough, charming enough, maybe a little too friendly. But there was an uneasy tension in the atmosphere. I could sense something beneath the surface, a tacit understanding between them and my husband that turned my stomach. As the night progressed, the drinks continued to flow, and the conversations became increasingly flirtatious. I tried to downplay the importance with a laugh, but deep down I was extremely uncomfortable. One of the men kept looking at me insistently, and every time I felt his eyes on me, a knot tightened in my chest. My husband, on the other hand, seemed totally relaxed, as if he was enjoying seeing me and getting all that attention. He was smiling at me like it was a game. Finally, we all ended up at our house. I didn't want to, but my husband insisted that it would be quieter at home. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I wasn't ready for. Once in the house, the atmosphere changed. The boys were sitting on the couch, joking around, but there was a tension in the air. I was in the kitchen trying to keep busy when one of them came in to help me clean up. He got too close. He was only inches away from me, and I could feel his breath on my neck as he bent down to grab a towel. My heart was racing again, but not in a good way. Then he whispered something in my ear. I couldn't hear everything he said, but enough to know that this was no longer just a friendly meeting. I was trying something, and I could feel the situation getting out of control. My husband was in the other room, probably aware of what was going on, but he didn't seem to care. I felt trapped. I tried to ignore him, but the tension kept building. The man kept brushing against me, making subtle touches to see how far I could go. I froze. I should tell him to stop. I should guide my husband, but how would that look? My mind was spinning with a million thoughts, and my body was reacting in ways I didn't understand. I didn't know if it was fear, excitement, or both. I was on the verge of something dangerous. That's when I realized how deep I was in this situation. I needed to get out of the kitchen, get out of the house, get out of this whole mess, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried to move, it felt as if something was holding me back, as if an invisible weight was holding me in place. The air in the kitchen felt thick, almost suffocating. I needed to get out of there, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. The man next to me wouldn't back down, and the way he looked at me made my hair stand on end. He leaned even closer, his breath now in my ear, and whispered something else. This time I heard it clearly. "You seem to like this." That one sentence was enough to snap me out of my frozen state. I backed up quickly, hitting the counter behind me, trying to put as much distance between us as possible without making a scene. My heart was pounding and I felt my face burning, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. I needed to stop this now, but my mind was in chaos, and I didn't know what to do. I looked towards the door, hoping that my husband would come in and maybe realize that things had gone too far, but he didn't. It was at that moment that I realized he wasn't going to do it. He was the one who put me in this situation from the beginning. I was alone, pushed the man who was standing nearby, and walked into the living room where the other two men were laughing with my husband. They didn't seem to notice the attention or the panic I was feeling. My husband looked at me and smiled, completely oblivious to the whirlwind inside me. Or maybe he knew and didn't care. I couldn't tell anymore. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands squeezing the cushion so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the kitchen, how close we'd come to crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. I wanted to say something, to tell my husband that this wasn't fun, that I wasn't getting excited, but I couldn't find the words. The night wore on, each moment heavier than the last. The men were still drinking, still laughing, and my husband was still acting like everything was fine. But none of this was normal. I kept reenacting the moment in the kitchen, how close I came to losing control of the situation. It scared me, and more than that, it made me angry. How could my husband push something like that on me? How could I be so casual about it, as if my feelings didn't matter? Finally, the men got up to leave. I felt a wave of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. I watched them walk out the door, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe again. But the tension didn't go away. It was still there, bubbling just below the surface. After they left, I turned to my husband. He was still smiling, like it had been the perfect night, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something. "What was that?" I asked him with a trembling voice. "What do you mean?" He replied, genuinely confused, as if he had no idea what I was talking about. "That," I said, pointing towards the door where his friends had gone. "What went through your head?" He shrugged, his relaxed attitude only making me angrier. "It was just a bit of fun. You didn't have to do anything you didn't want to." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You really don't understand," I said, raising my voice. "That's what you call fun. You got me into a situation where one of your friends harassed me, and you just sat there as if it was nothing." My husband's expression changed. The smile disappeared, and for the first time that night I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. But he didn't apologize. Instead, he became defensive. "I thought you liked it," he said. "You didn't say anything. You didn't stop it. That was the last of it. I couldn't take it anymore." How was I supposed to know what to do? How was I supposed to react? I screamed. "You're my husband. You're supposed to protect me, not get me into situations like that." We argued for what seemed like hours. Every time I tried to explain how uncomfortable I had felt, how close we had come to everything getting out of hand, he would subtract. He kept insisting that it was just a fantasy, that he could have stopped it all at any time. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how trapped I felt. I felt how helpless I had been at that moment. I was shaking when the discussion finally ended. My husband stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room. I stood there, staring at the empty wine glasses and the remnants of a night that almost ruined everything. I didn't know what to do next. I felt betrayed, confused, and deeply hurt. This was not what was expected of a marriage. I stood there in the silence of the room, my mind spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the kitchen, how close we had come to losing control. The way my husband just stood there, laughing quietly with his friends, made me feel a knot in my stomach. How could he not see how dangerous what he was doing was? How could he push me into something so reckless? I couldn't stand the attention and the environment anymore. I got up and headed for the kitchen, hoping that the simple act of cleaning up would help me calm down. I picked up the wine glasses, trying to concentrate on the task, but my hands were shaking and my heart was still racing. I relived the night in my head, fragment by fragment, how he had asked me to participate, how his friends looked at me like I was something they could take if they wanted. And then the moment in the kitchen, when that man came over, I felt trapped, cornered. It was as if I had frozen, unable to move or speak. I hated myself for not standing up to him, for letting things go so far. I finished the dishes and looked out the window into the darkness outside the house. The house was quiet now, but it didn't feel quiet. It felt empty, cold. I knew I couldn't let it go. Something had changed between my husband and me, something that could not be ignored or hidden. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. I took a deep breath and headed to the bedroom. My husband was already in bed, staring at his phone, as if nothing had happened. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment watching him, wondering how I could be so indifferent to everything that had happened, how I could be so blind to the damage and confusion I had caused. Finally, I could stand it no longer. "We need to talk," I said, in a calm but firm voice. "We." He looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" he asked, as if he didn't know what I meant. "About what you did," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. He sighed and put his phone aside. "I told you it was just a bit of fun. You didn't have to do anything you didn't want to." I shook my head, feeling the anger welling up in me again. "You don't understand. You got me into a situation where I felt trapped. You didn't care how I felt. You were too busy living out a fantasy. And you didn't think about what you were doing to me." He frowned and sat up a little straighter. "I thought you were okay with it. You didn't say no." I didn't know how I responded. The words came out before I could stop them. I didn't know how to say no without ruining everything, without making things even more awkward. I trusted you to protect me, to care about me, and instead you put me in a situation where I almost did something I would regret my whole life. He looked away, his expression impossible to read. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, that he would finally understand what he had done. But when he spoke, his words were cold. "You're overreacting. Nothing happened. You're making a big drama over something that's not important." That was it. I couldn't go through with this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that our marriage was fine. He had pushed me too far, and there was no going back. I got up, grabbed my phone, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice now crisp. I stopped in the doorway, my back to him. "I need space. I need to understand what I want, because right now I don't think I can go through with this." He said nothing, and I didn't look back. I left the bedroom, walked down the hallway, and out the front door, breathing in the cool night air. As I stood there, taking deep breaths to calm myself, I realized something. I had been so focused on what he wanted, trying to please him, that I had completely lost sight of what I needed, what I deserved. I wasn't going to let that happen again. As I walked down the street away from the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being pushed around, done being trapped in someone else's game. From now on, I was going to take control of my own life, my own decisions, and no one was going to force me to do anything I didn't want to do anymore.